All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to follow a single thread that connects our most frustrating habits all the way to some really deep questions about our own freedom. And it all kicks off with a phrase I guarantee you've heard 1,000 times.
Right? You know this one. You've heard it in movies, probably used it on a friend, maybe even had it thrown back at you. It sounds so simple, so true, like this perfect little nugget of wisdom.
But here's where we pull back the curtain. What if this classic definition has almost nothing to do with actual clinical insanity? And what if the guy everyone credits with saying it, Albert Einstein, had absolutely nothing to do with it? Let's get into the real story.
So where did it really come from? Well, the truth is, its origins aren't in a physics lab, but in the world of recovery. It first popped up in print in Al-Anon and Narcotics Anonymous materials back in 1981. Then a novelist helped make it famous, and it wasn't until 1990 that someone decided to pin it on Einstein.
So that's our roadmap for today. We're going to use this famous quote as a jumping-off point to look at the very real cycle of self-sabotage. Then we'll ask how much control we really have, and see what happens when this idea of insight gets into the really high-stakes territory of medicine and the law. And we'll finish up by tackling that huge gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it.
Okay, so if the quote isn't really about being insane, what is it about? Well, that pattern it describes, that cycle of repeating our mistakes, has a name in psychology. It's called self-sabotage.
And this is stuff we all recognize. I mean, procrastinating on that huge project until the very last minute, pushing away someone you actually care about, or, being such a perfectionist that you're too scared to even start. These aren't signs of insanity, not at all. They're just deeply, deeply human ways we get in our own way.
But the big question is why? Why do we get stuck in these loops? Well, if you go way back to Freud in psychoanalytic theory, you find this really powerful idea called repetition compulsion.
And here's the core of it. The theory is that we're not choosing to do this stuff consciously. Instead, we're being driven by this unconscious need to replay old, unresolved problems. It's like our actions become the memory. We're remembering with our behavior what our conscious brain has locked away.
So, if we've got these unconscious forces pulling the strings, it raises a huge question. How much control do we actually have? And that leads us to this really fundamental concept in psychology called your locus of control.
Think of it like a spectrum. On one end, you have an internal locus of control. That's the belief that I make things happen, that you're the captain of your own ship. On the other end is an external locus of control, which is the feeling that things happen to me, that your life is basically run by fate, luck, or other people. And this isn't just some abstract theory. Where you fall on that spectrum shapes pretty much everything. It affects how motivated you are, how you bounce back from failure, and whether you see a setback as a challenge to overcome or just more proof that you can't catch a break.
So far, we've been talking about the kind of psychology that applies to all of us. But now we're going to shift gears. What happens when the very ability to see our own patterns, what we call insight, just completely breaks down? This is where we cross a line from everyday struggles into the world of clinical diagnosis.
See, in psychiatry, the word insight means something very, very specific. It's not just about self-awareness. It's about a patient's ability to recognize that they have an illness and to understand why treatment is necessary.
Now, the most profound lack of insight has a medical name, anosognosia. And this is so important to get. This is not denial. This is not stubbornness. It is a neurological symptom, a real physical issue caused by the illness itself that literally makes it impossible for someone to see that they are sick.
And get this, it is shockingly common. Current estimates suggest that about half of all people with schizophrenia experience anosognosia, 50%.
And it affects around 40% of individuals with bipolar disorder. So this isn't some rare thing. For a huge number of people, it's a central part of their illness.
And this isn't just a medical problem. Because when a concept like insight gets into the legal system, the consequences are enormous. It brings up these fundamental questions about our rights, our freedom, and what it means to consent. And what researchers are finding is, honestly, pretty disturbing. Multiple studies show that a patient's own understanding of themselves is often just dismissed, relabeled as a lack of insight, and then used as a legal justification to force treatment on them.
Just listen to how one patient, a woman named Eliza, described this impossible trap she was put in. She called it a complete catch-22. If you say you're ill, they say you must not be that ill. But if you say you don't need help, they take that as proof that you are ill and must be forced into the hospital. And when you dig into the research, it all points to this pretty uncomfortable conclusion. In the real world, the number one thing that predicts whether a doctor says you have insight isn't really your self-awareness. It's your compliance. It's whether or not you'll agree to the treatment. In effect, insight becomes a test of obedience.
Okay, we've gone from a simple quote that Einstein never said, all the way to the legal rights of patients. Let's bring this all back home. What does this mean for us in our own lives?
Well, it points to something we can call the insight trap. You know that aha moment when you finally figure out why you always procrastinate or why you have a certain pattern in relationships? That feels great, right? It feels like progress. But sometimes that understanding can become a cozy little replacement for the much harder work of actually changing what you do.
And that's really been our whole journey today, right? We started with a simple quote, then we looked at the unconscious forces that make us repeat our mistakes, the belief systems that color how we see the world, and then we saw how this one little word, insight, holds incredible power in medicine and law, power that has real consequences for people's freedom.
And that's where we'll end. Understanding why we get stuck, why we do the same thing over and over again, it's absolutely the first step. You have to start there. But it's only the first step. The real question this whole thing leaves us with is, what action are we going to take next?